It was on the 20th anniversary of our marriage that everything came crashing down. After 2 decades of building a life together, my husband, Mark, suddenly turned to me one evening and said the words that would change everything. His face was twisted with anger, his voice trembling as he pointed at me accusingly. "You're the evil woman who's been delaying me from acquiring great fortune," he spat out. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I stood frozen, unable to believe what I had just heard. For 20 years we had shared everything. The good, the bad, the joy, and the pain. And now, in this moment, he was blaming me for his lack of success, for every dream that never came true. The man I had loved, built a home with, and raised our children together with, was calling me the reason he hadn't reached the heights he always dreamed of. I couldn't speak at first. The silence between us grew heavy, almost suffocating. I was shaking, not from fear but from the utter disbelief. How could he say such a thing? I had supported him through every setback, every failure. I had stood by him when everyone else had turned their backs. Yet here he was, accusing me of being the obstacle in his life. "Mark," I finally managed to say, my voice shaky. "What are you talking about? How could I possibly be the reason you haven't succeeded? I've given you my love, my support. I've been here through it all." But he wasn't listening. His anger only grew, his voice louder. "You just don't understand, do you? Every time I try to get ahead, you hold me back. Every time I make a decision, you criticize it. Your doubts, your fear, it's like a chain around my neck, dragging me down. You're the evil force in my life, and you've been for years." I stood there in stunned silence, unable to respond. What could I say? How had I become the villain in his eyes after all these years? I remember the way his eyes flickered with a strange mixture of resentment and guilt, as though he knew what he was saying was harsh but couldn't stop himself. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I felt a strange distance between us, like we were no longer the same people who had once been so close. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I thought about everything Mark had said. I wondered if he was right. Had I really been the reason for his failures? Was I holding him back without even realizing it? Or was this just another one of his outbursts, a way to shift blame onto someone else instead of facing his own shortcomings? But the more I thought about it, the more I felt a pang in my heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. This wasn't just about me. There had to be more to it. The next morning I woke up early, the weight of the conversation still heavy in my mind. Mark had left the house before I even had a chance to speak to him, and I knew I had to figure out what was really going on. Was this a midlife crisis? Was he feeling the pressure of years of unfulfilled dreams? Or was it something more than that? As the day went on, I tried to distract myself. I did the laundry, cleaned the house, went through the motions of my usual routine. But everything felt different now. Every room in our home seemed to hold memories of a time before, when we were happy, when we believed in each other's dreams. And now it felt like all of that was unraveling. I decided to call my best friend, Carol, to talk things over. Maybe she would have some perspective. We'd known each other for years, and she had always been the voice of reason in my life. "Carol," I said, my voice tight, "I don't know what to do. Mark said something last night that has left me shaken. He told me I'm the reason he hasn't succeeded, that I'm the evil woman holding him back. Can you believe that?" There was a long pause on the other end before she spoke. "Oh girl, I'm so sorry. That sounds like a whole lot of frustration on his part. But I don't think that's true. You've been nothing but supportive." I let out a sigh of relief, grateful for her words. But as I sat there, a small part of me still wondered if there was any truth to what Mark had said. Had I really been the one to hold him back? Was I so wrapped up in my own fears and doubts that I hadn't noticed how much it had affected him? The phone call ended, but the questions lingered in my mind. Later that afternoon I sat down with a notebook, writing out all the moments where I had supported Mark, all the times I had stood by him in the face of adversity. I wanted to remember all the sacrifices I had made, the things I had given up for the sake of our family. But as I wrote, a thought crept into my mind that I couldn't shake. Maybe I had been too focused on my own needs, my own insecurities. Maybe I hadn't given him the space to chase his dreams the way he needed. Just as I was lost in thought, Mark walked through the door. His face clouded with frustration. He didn't say a word, just walked past me, heading straight for the kitchen. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. I was about to speak, to ask him what had been going on in his mind, but before I could open my mouth, he turned sharply and said something that made my heart stop. "You know," he said, "I think it's better if we go our separate ways. Maybe then I'll finally be free to reach my full potential." My heart sank. Was this it? Was this the end? How could everything have come to this? I stood there, rooted to the spot, as Mark's words hung in the air. "Maybe it's better if we go our separate ways," he said again, more quietly this time, as though the weight of what he was suggesting was starting to sink in. My breath caught in my throat. I had heard people speak about divorce, about breaking up after years of marriage, but hearing it from my own husband, after 20 years, was like a blow to my chest. How had we gotten here? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My mind raced as I tried to process everything that had just happened. Mark had always been quick to anger, quick to place blame when things didn't go right. But this was different. This wasn't just a typical fight. It felt like the end of everything we had built together. "Mark," I finally said, my voice trembling, "what are you talking about? After everything we've been through, everything we've shared, you want to throw it all away?" He looked at me, his eyes empty, his face drawn tight. "I've tried for years, Jane. I've tried to make this work, but I'm stuck. You don't get it. You've held me back. You're the one thing stopping me from reaching my dreams, from becoming the man I was meant to be." His words cut deep, deeper than I could have ever imagined. I had always known Mark struggled with his ambitions, his desire to achieve more, but I never thought he would blame me for it. I never thought he would accuse me of being the obstacle in his life. And yet, here we were, on the verge of losing everything. I tried to hold back my tears, but they came anyway, a silent stream down my face. "I've been here for you through everything, Mark. Through every setback, every failure. I've always believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. How can you say this to me?" He didn't respond. Instead, he turned his back on me, walking towards the living room and sitting down on the couch with his head in his hands. His posture was defeated, exhausted. But there was something else in his eyes. Something that I couldn't quite place. I sat down beside him, cautiously, unsure of what to say next. "I don't know what's going on with you, Mark," I whispered. "But this isn't you. You've never spoken to me like this before. If you're feeling stuck, if you think I'm holding you back, let's talk about it. We can work through this together." He didn't look at me. "It's too late for that," he muttered. "I've already made up my mind. I need to do this on my own. I need to figure out who I am without you." The words hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe. The man I had loved, the man I had built my life with, had just told me he didn't need me anymore. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. How had we gotten here? How had our marriage, our partnership, turned into this cold, hollow exchange? "I love you, Mark," I said, my voice breaking. "I love you, and I don't want to lose you. But if you're really set on this, if you really think leaving me is the answer, then I guess there's nothing I can do to change your mind." I stood up, my heart aching with every step. I didn't know what else to say, what else to do. We had talked about everything before. Our dreams, our goals, our fears. But now it felt like the conversation had turned into something we could never come back from. I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Everything felt off, as if the world itself was shifting beneath my feet. I wanted to scream, to beg Mark to take it all back, to tell me this was just a phase, that everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a phase. Something had changed between us. Something irreversible. Suddenly, Mark stood up from the couch, his expression hardening. "I've been thinking about it," he said. His voice colder now, more distant. Maybe I need a break. Maybe I need to figure out who I am without you holding me back. His words hit me again, and this time I couldn't stop the tears from coming. I turned around, wiping my eyes quickly, but there was no hiding the hurt I felt. "Mark, please," I whispered. "Don't do this. Don't walk away from everything we've built. I'm not the enemy here. I've always supported you." But he was already walking toward the door, his coat in hand. "I need space, Jane. I need to think." And just like that, he was gone. I stood in the living room, staring at the door as it swung shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as though I had lost everything in that single moment. My heart was broken, and yet I couldn't help but wonder, was this really all my fault? Had I been the one to hold him back all this time? The next few days were a blur. Mark didn't come home, didn't answer my calls. He had completely shut me out, and I had no idea where he had gone. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself from the pain. I went through the motions of daily life, making dinner, doing the laundry, talking to the kids, but it all felt empty, hollow. Every time I passed our bedroom, every time I saw his favorite chair in the living room, I felt a pang in my chest. I spent hours on the phone with Carol, talking through my feelings, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But no matter how many times I replayed the conversation in my head, no matter how many ways I tried to look at it, I couldn't understand why Mark had turned on me so suddenly. Then, a week after he left, I received a letter from him. I opened it with shaking hands, my heart pounding in my chest. The words that followed would set everything in motion. "I've made a decision," the letter began. "And I don't think we can fix what's broken between us. I'm not coming back, Jane." I couldn't read the rest. The pain was too much, too raw. Felt like my entire world had collapsed. How could he make such a final decision without even talking to me? Without giving us a chance to figure things out? I held the letter in my hands for what felt like hours, the reality of it sinking in slowly. Mark was really gone. He was really leaving me. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the phone rang. It was Mark. "Jane," he said, his voice shaky. "I made a huge mistake. Can we talk?" But when I tried to respond, the line went dead. The silence that followed was even more unbearable than before. What had he meant? What was going on? And why was he calling me now, after everything he had said? I didn't know the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. Our story wasn't over yet. The phone call ended abruptly, and I sat there, frozen, staring at the dead screen in my hand. What had just happened? Was that really Mark on the other end? Why had he called me after everything he said and did? The confusion and uncertainty gnawed at me like a constant ache in my chest. For a moment I thought I might lose control, that my emotions would consume me. But I knew I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. I stood up and paced the living room, my mind racing. What was Mark thinking? Did he truly regret what he said? Or was he simply feeling guilty about how things ended? He hadn't even explained why he left in the first place, why he was so sure that walking away was the right thing. There had been no closure, no clear understanding of where we went wrong. I couldn't wait around forever. My life had to go on with or without him. But deep down I wasn't ready to let go. I wasn't ready to believe that everything we had was truly over. I decided to try calling him back. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number, each ring making my heart beat faster. I knew I was taking a risk. What if he didn't answer? What if he had already made up his mind and was done with me for good? The phone rang, and just as I was about to give up, I heard his voice on the other end. "Hello." Mark's voice sounded distant, like he wasn't really present. It wasn't the voice I remembered, the voice full of warmth and love. This was something else. "Mark, it's me, Jane. Why did you call?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I had so many questions, so many things I needed to understand. But there was a part of me that was afraid to hear the answer. I don't know," he replied after a long pause. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything. I don't think I handled it the right way. I felt a flicker of hope, a small spark that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. Mark, what are you saying? Do you want to talk? Do you want to try and make this work? There was a long silence before he spoke again. I don't know if I can come back, Jane. I've been so focused on my own dreams, on my own success, that I forgot about us. About you. And now, I don't know how to fix it. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears. It was like he was speaking my thoughts. I had always believed in him, supported his dreams. But somewhere along the way we lost sight of each other. We lost sight of the love that had once brought us together. I don't want to lose you, Mark, I said softly, the words tasting like defeat. But I can't keep living in this limbo. I need to know what's going on in your heart. What do you really want? There was another long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, but he didn't speak right away. I need time, he said finally. Time to figure things out. Time to figure out what I really want, and what's best for both of us. I felt my stomach tighten. It was the one thing neither of us had in abundance. I couldn't wait forever. I couldn't just sit around hoping he would come back and make everything better. But at the same time, I couldn't walk away from him. Not after everything we had been through. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But don't take too long. I can't keep waiting for you forever. I know, he replied, his voice softer now. I'll figure it out. I promise. The line went dead again, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own breath. I sank down onto the couch, staring at nothing in particular. The weight of everything was finally starting to settle in. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Mark would come back, or if we would ever be the same again. But I had to make a choice. I had to decide if I was willing to wait, if I was willing to risk everything for the chance to rebuild what we once had. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I spent most of my time trying to distract myself, working on my routine, spending time with the kids, and reaching out to friends and family for support. But inside I was a mess. I couldn't stop thinking about Mark, about everything he had said, about the future that now seemed so uncertain. And then, one evening, just as I was beginning to think I couldn't take it anymore, I received a text message from him. "Can we meet tomorrow?" it said. "I need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart racing. This was it. The moment of truth. Would we finally have the conversation we both needed to have? Or was this just another false hope, another empty promise that would lead to more heartbreak? The next day I got ready as usual, but everything felt different. I was anxious, my mind swirling with possibilities. I didn't know what Mark was going to say. I didn't know what he wanted from me. But I knew one thing. This meeting would determine everything. I drove to the park where we had agreed to meet. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the empty benches and paths. It was quiet, peaceful. But inside I was a storm of emotions. I could hardly breathe, let alone think straight. I saw him before he saw me. Mark standing near the fountain, his back to me. He looked different somehow, as though something had changed in him since the last time we spoke. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated. He wasn't the confident, ambitious man I had known. He was a shadow of the person I remembered. I approached him slowly, unsure of what to say. "Mark," I said softly. He turned around, his eyes tired, but there was a flicker of something else in them, regret maybe, or guilt. "Jane," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for everything. For what I said, for what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." I stood there for a moment, taking in his words. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive him, or if I even could. But I also knew that I couldn't move forward without understanding what had brought us here. "I don't know what happened, Mark," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know how we got to this point. Love you. But I can't keep going like this. I need to know where we stand." He took a deep breath and looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. And then, with a voice full of uncertainty, he said the words that would change everything once again. I think I've been running away from myself, Jane. From who I really am. And I think that's what's been holding me back. His confession hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't know what it meant or what he expected from me. But one thing was certain. We were at a crossroads, and the choices we made in the next few moments would determine the future of our relationship. But just as I was about to ask him more, a sudden noise interrupted us. A loud crash from the direction of the fountain. We both turned in shock, just in time to see someone, fall into the water. It was like time stood still. My heart skipped a beat. Mark looked at me wide-eyed. Is that someone we know? I didn't know what to say. The person was still struggling in the water, flailing, and we had to act fast. But little did we know, this moment would shift everything once again. The person in the water was struggling to stay afloat, flailing desperately as they tried to catch their breath. I couldn't see their face clearly from where we stood, but the panic in their movements was enough to tell me they were in trouble. Without thinking, I rushed forward, Mark right behind me. "Stay back," he called out, but I didn't listen. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. The person needed help, and I was the only one close enough to reach them in time. The water was cold, and the stones around the fountain were slick with moss. I could barely keep my footing as I knelt down, stretching out my hand toward the struggling figure. "Grab my hand," I shouted, my voice urgent. The person's eyes were wide with fear, their hand reaching out toward me. I barely managed to grab hold of their wrist before they slipped, their body jerking with the force of the current. I pulled as hard as I could, my muscles straining, and finally, with one final effort, I dragged them to the edge of the fountain, where Mark reached down to help pull them the rest of the way out. I collapsed onto the ground, panting from the exertion. My heart was racing, and the cold water seeped into my clothes, but I didn't care. The person was safe. That was all that mattered. Mark helped the person sit up, and I quickly checked to make sure they were okay. The figure was a young man, maybe in his late 20s. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock, but he was breathing. That was a good sign. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice softer now. He nodded slowly, shivering. "Yeah, I don't know what happened. I just slipped, I guess." Mark gave him a concerned look, but there was something distant in his eyes. "You should be more careful," he said, his tone harsh. "You could have drowned." I looked at Mark, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. It wasn't like him to be so blunt, especially when someone had just been in danger. But before I could say anything, the young man spoke again. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to repay you." I shook my head. "No need for that. You're safe, that's all that matters." We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between Mark and me still hanging in the air like a thick cloud. I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said earlier, about needing time to figure things out. And now, here we were, saving a stranger's life, but neither of us had addressed what was really going on between us. The young man slowly stood up, still unsteady. He looked at us both, as if weighing whether to say something more. "I guess I should go," he muttered, clearly embarrassed by what had happened. "No, don't leave just yet," I said quickly. "Let's get you warmed up first. You're shivering." He hesitated for a moment before nodding, allowing us to guide him to a nearby bench. Mark and I stood off to the side, neither of us speaking, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept stealing glances at him, wondering what was going on in his head, what had made him so distant. The conversation we needed to have was still hanging in the air, unspoken. Finally Mark spoke. "We should take him to the hospital, just to make sure he's okay." I nodded, relieved that he was at least thinking practically. "Yes, that's a good idea." We helped the young man to his feet again, and together, the three of us made our way to the parking lot. Mark's car was parked not far from the fountain, and I was glad to see that the young man seemed to be doing better, though he still looked exhausted. We drove him to the nearby clinic, where the doctors confirmed that he was fine, just a little shaken up and cold from the water. They gave him a warm blanket and some fluids to rehydrate him, and after a few hours of monitoring he was free to go. As we were leaving the clinic, the young man turned to us with a grateful smile. "Thank you both so much. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "You're welcome," I said softly. "Just take care of yourself from now on." He nodded, still looking a little dazed. "I will. I'll never forget what you did for me." As he walked away, Mark and I stood there in silence, watching him disappear into the night. The whole situation felt surreal, like a strange interruption to everything we had been dealing with. It was as though the universe had thrown us this curveball to distract us from our own problems. Problems I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "I should go," Mark said suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't even look at me as he spoke. "I've got some things to figure out." "Mark," I said, my voice tight with frustration, "we need to talk. This can't keep going on. We've been avoiding the real issue for too long." He stopped in his tracks but didn't turn around. "I know," he said quietly. "But not tonight." With that he walked away, leaving me standing there, cold and confused. I wanted to scream, to run after him and force him to talk, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way his voice had sounded, defeated and distant. Maybe it was the feeling that there was something bigger going on in his heart, something he couldn't, or wouldn't, share with me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the young man we had saved earlier was a reflection of everything that was happening with Mark and me. We had both been struggling in our own ways, trying to stay afloat in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. The young man had slipped into the water, almost drowning in his own fear, and it was only by a stroke of luck that we had been there to save him. Mark and I, on the other hand, had been slowly sinking into our own problems, unable to help each other. And now it felt like we were both waiting for something, anything to pull us back from the edge. I didn't know how we were going to fix this. I didn't know if we could. But one thing was clear. The longer we avoided the truth, the deeper we would sink. As I got into my car and drove home, I couldn't help but wonder. Had Mark truly changed, or was this just another chapter in our ongoing cycle of distance and regret? Would we ever find our way back to each other? Or was this the beginning of the end? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. We couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. Something had to give. And soon. The days that followed were the hardest I'd ever faced in my life. Mark had pulled away even further, the space between us growing with every passing hour. I had tried calling him several times, leaving messages, even sending texts. Each time I waited in hope, but the silence that followed was suffocating. It was as though the man I once knew had vanished, replaced by someone distant and unreachable. I woke up each morning, forcing myself to go through the motions of daily life. I'd help the kids with their schoolwork, make breakfast, tidy the house, but every action felt hollow. The house was too quiet without Mark's presence, too empty without the sound of his voice or the warmth of his laughter. I spent the evenings alone, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the phone in my hand, willing it to ring. But it never did. One afternoon I was sitting on the couch, staring out the window when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a wave of unease washed over me. I stood up slowly, my heart racing, unsure of who it could be. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Mark standing there, looking as though he hadn't slept in days. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes avoiding mine. "Mark," I said, my voice tentative. "What are you doing here?" He looked up at me then, his face tired, drawn. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this it? Was this the moment we had been avoiding? He sat down on the couch, and I took a seat across from him. The silence between us was thick, like a wall I couldn't break through. I waited, my breath held, unsure of what he was going to say. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began, his voice low and strained. "About us. About everything," I said. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. And I was wrong," he said, his words coming out in a rush. "I was wrong to blame you, Jane. I was wrong to say the things I said. You've always been there for me. You've always supported me. I don't know what came over me. I felt a weight lift off my chest, but it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. The words he'd said still echoed in my mind, still cut through me like a knife. "Mark, you hurt me," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't just say things like that and expect everything to be okay. I spent years standing by you, believing in you, and then you turn around and blame me for your failures." "I didn't mean it," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean any of it. I was just so caught up in my own frustration, my own failure. I thought maybe if I could blame you, it would somehow make everything feel better." I sat back in my chair, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much his words had hurt me. But instead I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "Why now, Mark?" I asked, my voice quieter. "Why did you come back now, after everything?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "Because I realized something. I realized that I've been so focused on what I don't have, on what I want to achieve, that I forgot what really matters. I've been running from the truth, from us. And I can't do that anymore." I felt a flicker of hope, but it was fleeting. The damage had been done, and no matter how much he apologized, things could never go back to the way they were. There were too many scars now, too many unanswered questions. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mark," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can forget what you said. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were." He reached across the table, his hand trembling as he placed it over mine. "Please, Jane. I don't expect you to forget. I just want a chance to make it right. A chance to prove to you that I love you, that I'm sorry." I pulled my hand away, not because I didn't care, but because the pain was too fresh. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Mark's face fell, his eyes darkening with sadness. "I understand. I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to just forgive me. But I want to try. I want to make things right, Jane." I stood up, walking to the window and staring out at the garden. The world outside felt so normal, so unaffected by the storm that had been raging inside my home. I needed space. I needed time to think. "Mark, I need time," I said, my voice trembling. "I need time to figure out if I can even trust you again. I don't know what's going to happen, but I need you to understand that I can't just pick up where we left off. I can't pretend like everything is fine when it's not." "I get it," he said quietly, standing up to join me at the window. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I'm asking for a chance to prove to you that I can be better. That I can be the man you deserve." I turned to face him, my heart heavy. "You keep saying that, Mark. But words aren't enough. I need actions. I need to see that you mean what you're saying." He nodded, his expression softening. "I'll show you, Jane. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." The silence between us grew once more, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew that I couldn't keep living in this limbo, this place of uncertainty. Mark stood there, his hands in his pockets, watching me, waiting. And I realized that the choice was no longer his. It was mine. "I need some time, Mark," I repeated, my voice firmer now. "I need time to figure out what I want. And I need you to respect that." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I will. I'll wait, Jane. I'll wait for as long as it takes." With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there alone. The quiet that followed felt both soothing and suffocating at the same time. I didn't know what the next step was, or even if there would be a next step. But one thing was clear: things had changed. And nothing would ever be the same again. As I stood there, staring out the window, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake. If letting Mark go, even temporarily, was the right choice. But deep down I knew that I had to do this. I had to put myself first for once. I couldn't keep waiting around for someone to fix what was broken. I had to figure out how to heal on my own. And so, I took a deep breath, turned away from the window, and began the long process of finding myself again. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Mark and me stretched on, each day feeling longer than the last. I had asked for time, and time was what I got. But with it came a deep, gnawing loneliness, a sense of isolation that I couldn't shake. I went through the motions, keeping up appearances for the sake of the kids and those around me, but inside I was unraveling. The house that had once felt like a home was now filled with echoes of what it used to be. The laughter, the late-night talks, the plans we had made. All of it seemed so distant now, as though it belonged to a different life, a different version of myself. I missed Mark, despite everything he had done, despite the hurt. It wasn't about the person he had become. It was about the man I had loved, the man I had spent 20 years of my life with. I tried to focus on other things. I went back to work, began attending church more regularly, and spent as much time as I could with the kids. They noticed the change, of course. They had grown used to the sight of their father coming home every evening, of us all sitting together at the dinner table. But now there was an empty seat, and it seemed to grow larger with each passing day. One afternoon, as I was picking up groceries, I ran into Carol, my best friend. She had been a rock for me during the past few weeks, offering me a listening ear whenever I needed to vent, and some much-needed advice when I was unsure of what to do. "Jane," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "How are you holding up?" I sighed, leaning against the cart. "I'm managing. I'm just taking things one day at a time. But, it's harder than I thought it would be. I thought giving Mark space would help, but now it just feels like we're drifting further apart." Carol gave me a sympathetic smile. "That's the thing about space. Sometimes it gives you the clarity you need to see what's really going on, but other times, it just makes things worse. You're both dealing with so much right now, Jane. But you can't ignore the fact that you're hurting too." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I've been giving and now I'm just empty. I don't know if I have enough left to keep going. Carol looked at me seriously. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Jane. You need to fill yourself up first before you can help anyone else. Including Mark." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It was so simple, so clear, yet something I had been too caught up in to realize. I had spent so many years pouring myself into Mark, into our marriage, that I had neglected myself. And now I was running on empty, unable to give any more of myself to him, or to anyone. "I've been so focused on what he needs," I said softly, "that I forgot about me. I don't even know who I am without him. I've always been Mark's wife, the mother. But what about me? What about my own dreams?" Carol's expression softened. "That's the first step, Jane. Rediscovering who you are. You've always been more than just a wife and a mother. You're a person in your own right. And I know you've got so much more to give, but you need to find it for yourself first. Not for Mark, not for anyone else. Just for you." Her words settled deep into my heart. I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship with Mark, by my role as a wife, that I had forgotten to invest in the woman I was before all of that. Before I met him, before we built our life together. Over the next few days, I took small steps to reconnect with myself. I spent time doing things I loved but had long neglected, reading, painting, and taking walks in the park. I signed up for a weekend cooking class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. Little by little, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried under years of obligations and responsibilities. But even as I focused on healing, a part of me still held on to the hope that Mark would come back to me, that we would find a way back to the love we once shared. I didn't know if that was realistic, but the thought of letting go was too painful to consider. And then one night Mark came back. It was late, and I was sitting on the couch, a book in my hands but my mind far away. The door opened, and I looked up, my heart racing in my chest. There he was, standing in the doorway, looking weary but somehow lighter, as though the weight he had been carrying for so long had finally begun to lift. "I'm sorry, Jane," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been running from myself for too long. I've been running from you, from everything." I stood up, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to say, what to do. Part of me wanted to run to him, to embrace him and tell him that everything would be okay. But another part of me, an unfamiliar part, felt a deep need to protect myself, to not fall back into old patterns. "You've hurt me, Mark," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "And it's not just about the words you said. It's about the way you made me feel, like I wasn't enough. Like everything we had didn't matter." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "I know. I've been so caught up in my own anger and frustration that I pushed you away. But I see it now, Jane. I see what I did. And I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to try, Jane. I want to try and make things right." I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to forgive him, wanted to believe that things could be the way they were before, but another part of me, part of the woman I was rediscovering, knew that I couldn't just go back to what was comfortable. I couldn't just pretend that everything would magically go back to normal. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can just forget the way you made me feel." "I don't want you to forget," he said gently. "I just want a chance to show you that I can be the man you deserve. I'll do whatever it takes." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. We stood there, facing each other, the weight of everything that had passed between us hanging in the air. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. We were at a crossroads. And no matter which path we chose, it would require us both to change, to grow, and to heal. And as I stood there, looking at the man I had once loved so deeply, I realized that the journey ahead would not be easy. But maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. Or perhaps we would discover that we were meant to walk different paths. Either way, I knew that the road ahead would be one I had to walk on my own first, before I could decide if Mark and I could truly heal. "I need time, Mark," I said softly. "I need to figure out what I want, what we want, and I need you to give me that space." He nodded, his face a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I will, Jane. We'll wait. I'll wait for as long as it takes." As he left that night, the silence that followed was no longer oppressive. It wasn't the quiet of an unresolved issue, but rather the quiet of a moment before something new, something uncertain. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt the flicker of hope. Not for what was, but for what could be. The following weeks passed by in a haze of uncertainty, but there was a shift inside me, a quiet, tentative sense of strength that I hadn't felt in a long time. Mark had kept his distance, respecting the space I had asked for. And though the silence between us was still heavy, it was different now. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the absence of unresolved tension. Mark was no longer trying to force something that wasn't ready to be fixed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't the one holding everything together. Instead, I focused on myself. Slowly, I rebuilt the pieces of me that I had abandoned for so many years. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when the weight of what had happened between Mark and me threatened to crush me. But I refused to let it consume me. I started taking better care of myself. Physically, emotionally, and mentally. I took long walks by the lake, joined a support group for women going through similar struggles, and even reconnected with friends I had lost touch with over the years. It was a process, but each day I felt a little more like myself. And in that process, I discovered something I had almost forgotten. I was enough, just as I was. I wasn't defined by my relationship with Mark. I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's mother. I was Jane with my own dreams, my own desires, and my own life to live. But as I began to rebuild, so did Mark. One evening, nearly a month after he had first returned, Mark called. This time, his voice was calm, measured, not filled with the desperate tone that had marked so many of our past conversations. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Jane," he said. "And I realize now how much I've taken for granted. How much I've relied on you to carry me through, without ever really giving you the support you needed in return." I sat down on the couch, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean, Mark?" "I mean that I've been selfish. I've been so focused on my own problems, my own ambitions, that I failed to see what was right in front of me. Our family. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but part of me remained guarded. And what exactly does that mean now? I want to start over, Jane, he said quietly. Not just for us, but for myself. I've realized that my happiness doesn't depend on success or achievement. It depends on being with the people I love, people who love me too. I don't want to lose that again. His words hung in the air, a promise wrapped in the vulnerability I had been waiting for. I closed my eyes, letting them wash over me. I had spent so much time angry, confused, and hurt. But now there was something else, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. I've been working on myself too, Mark, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not sure where we go from here. But I'm learning to be okay on my own. To stand on my own 2 feet again. I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was, but I'm open to trying. I don't need things to go back to the way they were, he replied. I just want a chance to prove that I can be the man you deserve. That I can be the person who supports you, who stands by you, just like you've stood by me for all these years. For a long moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. And in that silence, I realized something. I had been waiting for Mark to change. But the truth was I had changed too. And that change, whether we ended up together or apart, was something that no one could take away from me. I don't know what the future holds, Mark, I said, finally breaking the silence. But I know that I'm stronger than I was before. And I know that I can handle whatever comes next, whether that's with you or without you. I understand, he said softly. And I respect that. All I want is the chance to rebuild with you, to take things one step at a time, and to do it right this time. The conversation ended with an unspoken agreement, a quiet understanding between us. We weren't rushing back into anything, but we weren't closing the door either. We were just taking it slow, seeing where the road would lead. The days that followed were filled with small steps, moments of connection, of shared laughter, of trying to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Mark had his work cut out for him, and so did I. But for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of possibility between us. Not because we were perfect, not because we had all the answers, but because we were willing to try. And that was enough. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after our conversation, Mark showed up at the house with a small, unassuming bouquet of flowers. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something, a simple acknowledgement of how far we had come. I'm sorry for everything, Jane, he said, holding out the flowers. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I wanted to show you that I'm trying. I took the flowers from him, feeling the weight of his apology, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something that happened overnight, but it was something that could grow, slowly, in time. And maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other, one small step at a time. Later that evening, as I sat in the living room, holding the flowers Mark had given me, I reflected on how far we had come. The road ahead was still uncertain, still filled with questions and doubts, but I no longer felt lost. I had found myself again, and that was something I would never lose. Whether Mark and I would end up together or not, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer defined by what I had lost. I was defined by the strength I had found within myself. And that strength would carry me through whatever came next. I wasn't waiting for a fairy tale. I wasn't waiting for everything to be perfect. I was simply living, moving forward one day at a time. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. The door was open, but I wasn't waiting by it anymore. I was walking forward, with or without Mark, and that was enough. The phone rang again, and this time it wasn't Mark. It was Carol calling to check in. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice light but filled with concern. I smiled, looking out the window as the sun began to set. "It's going," I said softly. "It's going." The weeks following that conversation with Mark brought a sense of cautious optimism. We both kept our distance, but it wasn't the painful kind of space it had been before. It was the kind of space that allowed for growth, reflection, and understanding. We were no longer rushing to fix things, but instead, we were learning to accept the reality of what had happened and find a way forward from there. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of balance in my life. I was focused on myself, on healing, on rediscovering who I was beyond my marriage. I started to trust myself again, something that had been lost in the years of taking care of everyone else. I signed up for a yoga class, started cooking more of the meals I loved, and even began to write again, something I hadn't done in years. My heart felt lighter, and for the first time I began to truly enjoy my own company. Mark, too, seemed to be trying. I didn't know exactly what he was doing behind the scenes, but I could see the subtle changes in him. He seemed more present with the kids, more mindful in his conversations, and most importantly, he no longer wore the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was as though, in realizing how much he had taken me for granted, he was beginning to truly appreciate the small, everyday moments. It wasn't the big gestures or grand promises that mattered anymore. It was the little things that counted. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Mark showed up at the house again. This time he wasn't holding flowers. He wasn't apologizing either. He was just there. "I've been thinking," he said as he walked into the kitchen. His eyes warm but hesitant. "I know we've been taking it slow, and I think that's been good for both of us. But I wanted to ask you something. I've been working on myself and I hope you've noticed that. But I want to know, what do you need, Jane? What do you want?" I paused, wiping my hands on the dish towel, the question hanging in the air like a gentle challenge. It was a question I hadn't expected to hear. What did I need? What did I want? I had spent so much time thinking about Mark's needs, his feelings, how to help him fix himself. But I had never truly stopped to ask myself that question. What did I need? I don't know, Mark, I said softly, my voice trailing off as I processed the question. I've been so focused on what's been going wrong, on what I've lost, that I haven't really thought about what I want. He nodded, taking a step closer. That's okay. We've been through a lot. But I think it's important to start thinking about what makes you happy, what makes you feel fulfilled, what you truly need. I've been so focused on fixing my own life that I haven't asked you that once. I felt a lump form in my throat. The sincerity in his voice, the way he was looking at me, it was different. I had spent so many years putting his needs first, losing sight of my own. And here he was, finally asking the question I had been afraid to answer for so long. I need to feel like I'm enough again, I said quietly, the words coming out in a whisper, as if I had been holding them back for far too long. I need to feel like I'm seen, like I'm not just a supporting character in someone else's story. Mark's face softened, and he reached for my hand, gently holding it in his. You are enough, Jane. You always have been. I never truly saw you. I never saw all the sacrifices you made, all the things you gave up for me, for us. I'm sorry for that. I looked down at our intertwined hands, the silence between us filled with a depth of understanding that hadn't been there before. Maybe it wasn't too late to fix things. Maybe, just maybe, we could build something stronger this time, not because we were trying to recapture the past, but because we had learned from the mistakes we had made. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were, Mark, I said, my voice trembling slightly. But I'm willing to try. To try building something new with you. Slowly, day by day. His grip tightened around my hand, and I could see the relief in his eyes, but also the understanding that we were starting from scratch. I'm willing to do that too, Jane. Whatever it takes. I want to be the man you deserve. I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me, a quiet sense of hope taking root in my heart. Maybe the future wasn't as uncertain as I had thought. Maybe with time and patience, we could rebuild our foundation, brick by brick. Later that evening, after Mark left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-eaten dinner on my plate. The house felt quieter than usual, the silence settling over me like a blanket. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that reminded me of everything that was broken. It was the kind of silence that held possibility, the kind of silence that came with the understanding that, perhaps, we were both exactly where we needed to be. I thought about what Mark had said, that we were building something new. It wasn't about recreating the past, because that would never be possible. It was about taking what we had learned, about growing individually and together, and using that growth to create something stronger, something more authentic. In the weeks that followed, we continued to take things slow, making small changes, having deep, honest conversations, and making an effort to show up for each other in ways we hadn't before. It wasn't always easy. There were times when the past crept back in, old wounds that hadn't quite healed, but we kept pushing forward. We both knew that rebuilding a marriage wasn't a simple thing. It would take time, patience, and a commitment to doing the hard work. But for the first time in a long time, I believed it was possible. One evening, as I sat in bed reading a book, Mark came into the room and sat down beside me. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, watching me for a moment. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. His voice quiet but filled with warmth. I looked up at him, surprised. "Proud of me? For what?" "For everything," he said, his eyes soft. "For being strong, for finding yourself again, for not giving up on us. I know I haven't been the easiest person to love, but you've never given up on me." I felt my heart swell with emotion, and I reached for his hand, holding it in mine. "I haven't given up on you, Mark. But I'm learning not to give up on myself either." He smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the man I had fallen in love with. The man who was vulnerable, who was trying, who wanted to be better not just for himself but for us. And as I looked at him, I realized that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But there would also be moments of growth, of understanding, and of love. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to build a future together. As I turned off the light that night and settled into bed beside him, I felt a quiet sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it, together. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate dance. One step forward, two steps back. But despite the setbacks, there was something profoundly different this time. Mark and I had both learned to communicate more openly, to acknowledge the wounds we had inflicted on each other, and to be patient with the healing process. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instantaneous. But it was real. And that, for now, was enough. Mark had begun seeing a therapist, something I had suggested long ago but that he had resisted until recently. I could see the changes in him. He was more introspective, more aware of his own flaws, and more willing to take responsibility for his actions. He didn't have all the answers, but he was showing up, and that was more than I had ever expected. As for me, I continued my own healing journey. I had started focusing more on my work, diving into projects I had put off for years, and rediscovering my passions. I found joy in the small things, taking long walks in the park, reading books I had never had time for, and learning new skills. I was finally starting to feel like the woman I once was, the woman I had almost forgotten. But even in the midst of all this growth, there was an undercurrent of doubt that I couldn't shake. We were making progress, yes, but was it enough? Were we enough? One evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, the conversation took a turn I hadn't expected. "Jane," Mark said, his voice soft but heavy with something unspoken, "I've been thinking a lot about our future. About what comes next." I looked up at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "I don't want to just go through the motions anymore," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I want to be intentional about our future. I want to build something that's not just about surviving but about thriving. And I want to know if you're still with me, if you're willing to take that journey with me." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a proposal, not in the traditional sense, but it felt like one. It felt like he was asking me to take the leap with him, to trust in the future we were trying to create together. "Mark," I said, my voice shaky, "I don't know if I'm ready to promise that. I don't know if I can promise anything. But I can tell you this, I'm willing to keep trying. I'm willing to keep showing up just like you are. One day at a time." He nodded, a sad smile on his face. "That's all I can ask for, Jane. That's all I need." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same page. Not because everything was perfect, but because we were both committed to making it work. We were both willing to put in the effort, no matter how difficult it might be. The following days were filled with small moments of connection. We spent evenings cooking dinner together, laughing over silly mistakes in the kitchen, and talking late into the night about everything and nothing. There were still moments of tension, moments when the past resurfaced, but we learned how to navigate those moments with patience and understanding. But one thing lingered in the back of my mind, the question I had been avoiding, the question I was afraid to ask. What happens if we can't fix this? I had asked Carol, my voice heavy with uncertainty. She had looked at me with a knowing gaze. You'll never know unless you try, Jane. But whatever happens, you've already shown yourself how strong you are. You've already shown yourself that you can stand on your own, with or without him. And that's the most important thing. Her words echoed in my mind as Mark and I continued to work through our issues. I knew I couldn't rely solely on him to make me whole again. I had to continue finding myself independent of him. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the bond we had shared for so long. I couldn't just walk away without knowing we had truly tried. Then, one afternoon, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find Mark sitting on the couch, a letter in his hands. His face was serious, his expression unreadable. "Jane," he said, his voice shaky, "I need to talk to you about something." I sat down beside him, my stomach twisting. "What now?" "I've been offered a job," he continued, his eyes meeting mine. "It's in another city. A big opportunity, something I've always wanted. But there's a catch. If I take it, it means I'll be gone for a while. Months, maybe even a year." My heart sank. I had suspected something was coming, but hearing it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. "I know this isn't ideal," Mark said, his voice filled with regret. "I know it's going to be hard, but I need to do this. I need to prove to myself that I can achieve something on my own. And I need you to understand that this is something I have to do, whether we're together or not." I didn't know what to say. The thought of him leaving again, of being separated again, this time for even longer, was almost too much to bear. But at the same time I understood. This was his dream. This was his chance to find his own way, to build something for himself. "I get it, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I understand. And I want you to do this if it's what you need. But I also need to be honest with you. I can't go through what we've been through again. I can't keep living in this limbo." He nodded, a look of sadness crossing his face. "I don't want to lose you, Jane. I don't want this to be the end of us. I don't know what the future holds," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "But I know that I need to take care of myself first. I need to figure out who I am without you, without this." Mark reached for my hand, holding it gently in his. "I'll always love you, Jane. No matter where I go, no matter what happens. You'll always be a part of me." And just like that, I realized that our journey together was coming to an end. It wasn't because we had failed, it was because we had both grown. We had both learned the value of self-love, of standing on our own 2 feet. And while our paths were diverging, we had created something meaningful, something that would remain with us, even as we moved forward in separate directions. That night, as Mark left to prepare for his new opportunity, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space beside me. Felt like the end, but also the beginning of something new. Not just for him, but for me. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks after Mark left felt like a strange kind of stillness, a calm after a storm that had been raging for years. The house, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now felt like a blank canvas. There was peace, but it was the kind of peace that came with a quiet knowing. I had come a long way, and I was finally ready to move forward, no matter what that future looked like. I spent the first few days in reflection, allowing myself to grieve the version of the life I had once imagined. It was a life that had been built on expectations, on the idea of a perfect future. But now I knew better. Life wasn't perfect. And sometimes the most beautiful parts of life came from the unexpected, from the broken pieces that we had to rebuild and redefine. I had learned so much throughout this journey. About love, about forgiveness, about resilience. But most importantly, I had learned about myself. I had rediscovered the strength I had buried for so long. And in doing so, I had found a version of me that I could be proud of. No longer just someone's partner, or a mother, or a caretaker. I was Jane. And Jane was enough. The door had closed on one chapter of my life, but it was just the beginning of a new one. It was late one night, as I sat in the quiet of the living room, reflecting on everything I had been through, that I realized how far I had come. I had faced the darkest moments when I felt like I couldn't go on, moments when I thought I had lost everything. But here I was, stronger than before, ready to embrace the future with hope and confidence. I grabbed my journal from the coffee table and began to write, my pen flowing across the paper as the words came to me. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that teach us the most about who we are. We go through heartbreak, loss, and pain, but we rise. We rise stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. Don't let the fear of the unknown stop you from moving forward. Your journey is your own, and you have the power to shape it. Keep going. Keep growing. You are enough. You always have been. I stopped for a moment, reading the words I had just written. They were true. They were everything I had learned, everything I had become. And in that moment I felt ready for whatever life had in store for me. If you're reading this and you're standing at a crossroads in your own life, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You are not defined by the mistakes of your past or the failures that have held you back. You are capable of so much more than you can even imagine. And it's never too late to start over, to rebuild, and to find your own path. Whether you're healing from heartbreak, recovering from loss, or simply feeling lost in the noise of life, I want you to know that there is always hope. There is always a way forward. Take it one step at a time and trust that each step, no matter how small, brings you closer to the life you deserve. Remember, you are worthy of love, of peace, of success, and of happiness. You've made it this far, and you are stronger than you realize. Don't be afraid to embrace the future. It's yours to create. So keep going. Keep pushing forward. The world is waiting for you. And always, always remember, you are enough. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please do me a favor, like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. May you find the courage to take the next step, wherever it leads you. If you've enjoyed this story, or if it has inspired you in any way, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need it. Together we can help each other rise. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, stay you. If you found yourself on a similar journey, whether through heartbreak, self-discovery, or personal growth, I invite you to share your story. Reach out to others who are going through the same struggles. You're not alone. Together we can build a community of support, strength, and love. If you'd like to stay connected and receive more stories of resilience and hope, join my newsletter, and let's continue this journey together. You are not just a survivor. You are a warrior. And your story isn't over yet.